We begin in the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis. Zogt the Heilige Mishnah, Lo yoima Adam letabach. A person should not say to a butcher, Shkoili bedinner basar. Weigh for me for the worth of a dinner meat. So the main issue over here this Mishnah is discussing is not the weighing. We discussed that already in the previous Mishnah that you're not supposed to weigh on Yontif. Rather over here it's the fact that it's mentioning the price, the money. Avol sheichet, but you can go ahead and shecht. Umachalik b'neihem, and you divide it, and then later you'll know what you got, what you have to pay. Frag the Gemara, heichi ovid. So how exactly do you do? How exactly do you tell him what amount he should give you? If you're not going to be telling him that I want a certain amount of this animal, I want half of the animal, a quarter, or this piece. Rather, you want to tell him a certain price of how much you want to pay. But you're not allowed to mention the price. So how do you tell the butcher exactly what you want? So the Gemara answers, in different cities, in different places, they had certain pieces that had sort of set prices. And therefore, Besura, if it's in Surah, Omri, they would say, give me a tarta. That piece of a tarta. Everyone knew what the price of the tarta is. Or palga tarta, a half a tarta. Benorish, Omri, in Norish they would say, chelke. Give me a chelke, or a palga chelke, a half a chelke. Bepumpadisa, Omri, uzdye. Or palgozia, ozia or a half ozia. Benar pekoide, b'masamachasya amri, riva or palga riva. So you use these names, which everyone knows what the amount is, what the price for them is, but you're not allowed to mention the price clearly on Yontif. Zok Heilige Mishnah, Omer Adam lechaveiroi, a person could tell his friend or to the storekeeper, Male li klize, fill me up this vessel. And this is talking about when you measure on Yontif. So the way they would sell things those times, you would come to the store with your keli, and the storekeeper would measure it in his measuring cup, and then he would fill you up. So you can tell him, fill me up this keli, even if it's something that everyone knows the shiur of what it is. Aval loy b'mida, but not with a measure. Now exactly what the Tana means when he says that not with a measure, the Gemara will explain. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ima yekli shal mida. If the keli that's being used is a keli that has a certain measure, lo yimalenu, you're not allowed to fill up with it. We'll see in the Gemara it will explain the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Ma'aseh ba'Abishal ben Botnis. There was an incident with Abishal ben Botnis. Shahaya memala midaisav me'erev Yontif. He was filling up the measuring cups from the liquid or whatever it was, the wine or whatever it was that he was selling. He was filling it all up from before Yom Tov. And then he would give it to his customers on Yom Tov. So from here it seems that he's saying, like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that you're not allowed to fill it up on Yom Tov in a measuring cup, and therefore he filled it up all before Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah that it says, Abishal says, Af b'mayid oisekain, or the Bachas Geiris Af b'mayid osekain, that this Abishal ben Botnis, even in Cholamayid, he did so as well. Mipnei birurei amidis, because of birurei amidis. Rashi says that according to some versions, you're not Geiris these words, Mipnei birurei amidis. If you are Geiris it, what it means is when you fill up the liquid in the measuring cup, so it foams, and therefore you want to wait until the foam goes down to make sure that you fill it up 100% the amount that you're selling. So therefore, he would fill it up from before, so the foaming should go down, so you could fill it up properly. So this is something that he did even on Cholamayit, not necessarily on Yontif. The Gemara will explain more about this, as we'll see. The Chachamim say, Af b'chayil, even on a regular weekday, he would fill it up from the night before, and he would, from the night before, he would give it to the people, in order that it should drain out properly from the measuring cup. And Rashi explains that if he was selling oil, so the oil doesn't come out of the measuring cup completely. If you just give it to the person, the customer right there, and you pour the oil into his cup, some of the oil is going to be left in your measuring cup. So you would measure it from the night before, and then he would pour it and let it drain out the entire night. So like this, in the morning, he gave the entire amount of what was measured for the customer. Zok the Gemara, Mai avoloi b'mida. What does it mean when the Tanakama says you're allowed to fill up this cup, even if it has a measure in it, but not with a measure? What does it mean, not with a measure? Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, so Rav Yehuda Mashmuel says, avoloi b'kli hameyuchad lemida. You're not allowed to use a keli that's designated for measuring. In other words, it's been already used for this purpose to measure. This is the measuring cup in the store. You're not allowed to use that keli. Rather, avol kliya oimid lemida, if you have another cup that also has a measure to it, but it was never used yet as a measuring cup, when the measuring cup that's currently in use will break, then this one will be put to use. But until this point, it was not yet used as a measuring cup. So that, yimalenu, with that you can fill up. So that's what the Tanna Kama's opinion is. That you can use a measuring cup that everyone knows what its measure is, but it never was used yet as a measuring cup. So now according to this, what's Rabbi Yehuda coming to say? Even a keli that's standing there to be used for a measuring cup, if the one that's not currently in use breaks, you should not fill up with it. That's the pshat and the machlokes of the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, what do we see over here? Gabe Simchas Yomtiv, when it comes to preparing things for the food, for the Simchas Yomtiv. Rabbi Yehuda lo chumre, so over here in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that's more stringent, v'Rabbanan lo kula. And the Tanna Kama, the Rabbanan are being lenient. Frek the Gemara, but v'ha'ipcha shamina lo. Sorry, but we see, before in the Mishnah we had that their opinions were the opposite. The Tanan, because we learned before in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said, Shaykel adam basar keneged hakeli v'keneged hakufetz. You could weigh the meat against a vessel or against the butcher's knife. You can't use the regular weights to weigh it, but you can use a vessel or just a butcher's knife that you know its weight to weigh the piece of meat. The Chachamim Maimrem, and the Chachamim say, Ein mashgifchim bekaf miznayim kol iker. You're not allowed to look at all at the weight of what you're selling on Yontif at all. So what do you see over here? Alma, Rabbi Yehuda lekula. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that's lenient over here. And Rabbi Yehuda allows you to weigh it against keli or against the kufitz. And here the Rabbanan are the ones that say that you can't pay attention to the weight at all. So the Gemara says, Kashya, the Rabbi Yehuda. So we have a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Kashya, the Rabbanon, ad Rabbanon. And we have a contradiction in the Rabbanon's opinion. So the Gemara answers, the Rabbi Yehuda loy Kashya. The contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is not a question. Hasam b'she'eino imid lemida. In the previous Mishnah, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda was lenient is because there he's using a keli or a butcher's knife, which is not designated to be used for measuring, for weighing, that is. So therefore over there, regarding that, he was lenient. But over here, we're talking about using a measuring cup that's not currently in use, but it's standing to be used for that. Eventually, it's going to be used for that. So therefore over here, Rabbi Yehuda was stringent. The contradiction in Rabbanan's opinion is also not a question. Hossam, the reason why in the previous Mishnah by weighing the Chachamim were more machmer, because because he's doing the way you would do it on a weekday. Even on a weekday, if he doesn't have the regular scale to weigh the meat, so he would use the kufitz, he would use some other keli to measure the meat against it, or to weigh the meat against it. So therefore, since people do that during the week, Rabbanan Machmi, you're not allowed to do it in Yontif. But over here, over here, he's not doing the way it's done on a regular weekday. Regular weekday, he has the measuring cup that's already in use, and he's not using that. He's using another one that has not even been in use at all. So therefore, it's not the way it's done during the week. So Rabbanan are lenient. Rava has a different pshat in what the Tanna Kama said, avoloi b'mida, but not with a measure. And Rava says as follows. What do those words mean? You should not mention the measure. Meaning, you can use whatever you You can even use the keli that is already designated as in use for measuring, as long as you don't specify clearly that this is the measure. And then on that, Rabbi Yehuda on that came and argued and said, that if it's a keli that's already designated and it's being used for measuring, you're not allowed to fill with it. Alma, so the Gemara again asks the same contradiction. What do we see? So here, for Simchas Yomtiv, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that's being stringent and Rabbanan are being lenient. But before we see the opposite, you can weigh the meat against a keli or against the butcher's knife. You're not allowed to pay attention to weighing, to the weight of the meat altogether. So Almer Rabbi Yehuda lokole. Here I see that Rabbi Yehuda is the one that's lenient, v'Rabbanan l'chumra, and the Rabbanan are the ones that are stringent. Kashya the Rabbi Yehuda, Kashya the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan. So we have a contradiction both in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion and in Rabbanan's opinion. And for the Gemara, the Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda loikashya. The contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is not a question. Hasam b'she'enai miyuchad l'midah. There he's weighing the meat against a kufitz which is not designated for weighing. Therefore Rabbi Yehuda was lenient there. Hacha miyuchad l'midah. Here he's using it, he's measuring with the measuring cup that's already designated for this. Even if he's not verbally saying the weight or the measure that is, but nevertheless he's using something which is already designated for measuring. Therefore over here, Rabbi Yehuda was more stringent. According to the Rabbanan's opinion, that we don't have a contradiction what they are saying, because Hasam ka'avid k'da'avdim b'chayl. Over there, when you measure meat or when you weigh meat, that is against the keli or against the kufitz, people do that sometimes during the week, and therefore it's not allowed. But Hacha over here, even though he's measuring in this cup that's designated for measuring, as long as you don't verbally say this is the amount. So, loy ka'avid k'da'avdim b'chayl. He's not doing it the way people do during the week. Because the avdi inchi, it's very common for people, the mekarvi chamre b'mana de kila v'shaso, that they serve for their friend, even if it's not a sale, just to serve, to give a gift, or to just borrow or lend someone. And you serve in a vessel that is a measuring cup, and people drink from it. So if you're not mentioning what the measure is, so then it's not the way it's done during the week. Whenever you measure, you say, "Oh, look, this is the amount. This is how much we have here in this keli." So as long as you're not mentioning the measure, so then people sometimes just serve that way normally in the house to their friend, and therefore it's not the way it's done during the week. The next thing it said in the Mishnah was Ma'aseh b'Bishol ben Batnis, that he would prepare all the kelim to measure it from before Yom Tov. And then the Mishnah said that Abishal said that he did so even on Chalamayid. Tana and Abraisi we learned af b'mayid oisekain, that even on Chalamayid he did so mipnei bittul beis hamedrash, in order not to come to be mevatel the learning on the beis hamedrash. So Rashi explains that he was a chacham gadol, and many came to ask him questions. And in Yom Tov, specifically in Chalamayid, that is, when people are not working so much, so they have time to come ask him questions. So he didn't want to take off the time from the learning, so he would prepare it from before, so that he'll have it prepared for the customers that he has to give it to, so he'll have time by day to answer the questions, to learn Torah with people. So according to this, it's mashma that you're not guided in the Mishnah, Beirurei Amidis, which is the foaming that happens, and you want to wait until the foaming goes down. But rather, this is the reason here, because they don't want to be mevatel Torah. But Rashi says, even if you are guided in the Mishnah, Berurei Amidis, it goes together. Because when you measure, there's foaming, and it takes time to measure it properly, so therefore it's going to end up taking off a lot of time of his learning, and that's why he would prepare it from before. Tana Rabbanan and Abraisa we learned, Hu Kanas. So this Abishal ben Batnis, he gathered shloish meiz garbe yayin, 300 barrels of wine, mibirurei amidis. From this foaming, because of the foaming, so he ended up giving the people that he was selling the wine to a little bit less of the amount. And even though, as it said here, that he was medayik about this, to give the exact right amount, but apparently there were so many people that he didn't have the time for them to wait until he gives them the right measure, until the foaming goes down. So from all of this that he was giving them, because of the foaming, he ended up gathering 300 barrels of wine. The Chaved of Konsu and similar, his friends also gathered Shloish Meis Garbi Shemen. They gathered 300 barrels of oil, mimitzu amidis, because it takes oil time to drain out from one vessel to another. And people did not have patience to wait, so they ended up having a lot of extra wine and a lot of extra oil. So they didn't want to use it for themselves, because they felt like really this was part of the measure that belonged to their customers. So they brought it to the Gizbar of Hektish in Yerushalayim, and they wanted to give it to Hektish. It's not ours. Amar lehem. So the Gizbarim told them, Iatem zekukim lekach. It's not necessary for you to do this. And as Rashi explains, that they didn't try to steal anything from their customers. These customers were in a rush. They were meichel. They understood that they're not getting the full amount, but they were in a rush, and they weren't interested in waiting until it drains or the foaming goes down, and therefore you can keep it. Amru lahem, but they said to the Gizbarim, Af anu ein ritzainenu bekach, we don't want it either. Amru lahem, so the Gizbarim said to them, Hoyel v'chmartem al atzmechem, since you're being stringent on yourself, asumem tzarchei rabim, utilize this to make something that's going to be a benefit, a need for the public. The Tanya we learned in the Braise, Gozal, a person that stole, V'eni yedeh lemi Gozal, and he doesn't know from who he stole. Yasebem tzarchei rabim, so let him use that money to make something for the public. Mine, for example, what is this? Amar Rav Chisda, Beire shichin amayris, you dig a pit, or a ditch, or a cave, where you can store water for people, for the public to be able to use. Sagt the Gemara, Ad berei Rav Chisda l'Ravona Okfer. Rav Chisda was guiding Ravona Okfer. Rashi says he was taking a walk with him. V'darash, and he he told him the following halacha. You should not measure barley in the regular vessel that you use to measure this, and give to feed to your animal the barley on Yontif. Aval, you could do it with a shinui. Kaidirhu kav ay kabayim. You take the measuring vessel and you stick it into the pile of the barley, and then and you can feed your animal. You don't have to be concerned as long as it's done with the shinui. You can measure this way in Yontif. V'hanachtoim, and a baker, maidid, and which also refers to someone that cooks and prepares food. Maidid tavlin can measure the spices, and adds it to the pot. So you have to measure how much spices you need in order not to burn the pot or not to make the pot too spicy. So you're allowed to measure it to know how much spices to add. A woman is allowed to measure the flour on Yontif and she puts it in the dough, in the ingredients of the dough. Why is she allowed to measure it? Because then, if she knows the exact amount of flour that there is, she'll take challah with a good eye, generously. The amount of challah you're supposed to take is 1/24. If she doesn't know exactly how much flour there is, then she might be more mekamitz. Rashi says she might say, "Oh, I already gave enough. It's more than enough what I gave." But if she knows the exact amount, so then she'll make sure to actually give the right amount. So therefore, let her measure the flour so she should know what the amount is. Shmuel says, "Awesome, it's not allowed." But it was learned by the Braises of Shmuel, the yeshiva by Shmuel. The Rashi here says that in front of Shmuel, the Tanoim, that they taught the Braises from Rav Chiv and Rav Aishia. So they learned over there that mutter, that you are allowed to measure it. Amar Abaye, so Abaye explains, Hashte the Oma Shmuel Oser. So now that we know that Shmuel himself said that it's not allowed. The Tana the Beis Shmuel mutter. And in front of Shmuel, they learned in the Braise that it's mutter. So what does this mean? Shmuel halacha l'maisa salashminan. Shmuel was telling me what's the halacha l'maisa when people ask you, how should you answer? You should answer that it's not allowed. In other words, really it is allowed, but you shouldn't tell that to people. You should tell them that it's not allowed. Since this is something that could he doesn't want people to say this to halacha l'maisa. This is also a halacha ve'ein meirin kain, similar to what we had before. So therefore, we know that it's mutter, but nevertheless, Shmuel himself would tell people that it's aser. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Braise, ein sheinin kemach b'yomtiv. You're not allowed to re-sift flour on yontif. It was already sifted, but you want to have it even finer and better. It should be good, so you re-sift it. So you're not allowed to re-sift the flour on yontif. So Rashi says the reason is because this is something that can be done from before yontif. Now this is actually a isam d'Rabbanan. Minat Torah, this is eichel nefesh. It's mamish hamalacha in the eichel itself that is totally mutter, even if it could have been done from before yontif. But midrabanan, anything that could have been done from before yontif is not allowed to be done in yontif. Mishum Rab Papayis v'Rab Yudah ben Beseira amru shainin. You are allowed to re-sift the flour because it's really totally sifted already, and there's no big tirch in this, as Rashi says. Everyone knows that it's just the second time that you're doing it, so it's not the regular melacha of sifting of merakid, and therefore it's allowed. V'shavin, they both agree, shem nafal atoichet tzroire kisim, that if a pebble or a splinter fell into it, sheshainin, that then you're allowed to re-sift the flour to be able to eat it. Tane kamei de Ravine. Tane taught in front of Ravine a different opinion. Ein sheinin kamech b'yomtiv. You're not allowed to sift the flour on yomtiv. If a pebble or a splinter of wood fell inside, so then you're not allowed to re-sift it, it, but you should select it, you should take it out by hand. Amalei, so he said to him, Ravina said to him, no, it doesn't make sense, this is the way you're learning it. Kol shekain da'aser. To go ahead and select it by hand should definitely be aser. This is clear that you're doing a malacha of bayrer. So if you have a choice, either to re-sift it, and it doesn't look exactly like a malacha, because you're basically re-sifting what was sifted before, or to go ahead and directly do bayrer, it's better to just re-sift it. Darish Rave Baravone Zuti a Pische de Nerda. Rave Baravone Zuti, so he went on the gates of the city of Nerda, and he darshaned the following. Shainin kamach b'yontif. You're allowed to re-sift flour on yontif. In other words, you want it to be known to everybody that this is allowed. Amulu Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said, Puku v'omri leila abba. Go out and tell my friend, Shkila tivusach, you can take your goodness, v'shadi achizri, and throw it on the thorns. In other words, you're thinking that you're letting everybody know this leniency. Not necessary. Everybody knows it already. Puk chazi, go out in the city and see. Kame muhulte hadram benarda. How many sifters are there circulating in the city of Nerda on Yontif? Everybody knows that this is allowed. The Bisu, the Rav Yosef, the wife of Rav Yosef, Noa Kimcha, she would re-sift her flour agaba de Mahulta, on the back of the sifter. She would do it with a shinui. Amala, Rav Yosef said to her, Chazi, look, Ta'ana riftam al Yisabin, I want good bread with fine flour. In other words, he was telling her, you don't have to do the shinui, you can re-sift it on Yontif without a shinui. The Bisu, the Rav Ashi, the wife of Rav Ashi, Noala Kimcha agaba de Psaira, she would sift the flour on the underside of the table. When you take a table and you turn the top of the table upside down, so it has like a rim that could hold it inside of it, and she would sift it over there also to do it with a shinui. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisa says just on the tabletop, not in a regular keli that's used for the sifter, but you do it a shinui to sift it onto the table. Ravashi, so Ravashi said, Hadidon, my wife, Brate de Rami Bar Chama. She's the daughter of Rami Bar Chama. The Rami Bar Chama, Mara de Uvdave. Rami Bar Chama was a man, a master of his deeds. In other words, he was very particular to know how to do things right. Ve'ilav de Chazia, mi bein Nashe. If she wouldn't have seen this custom, the way she's doing it, in her father's house, she wouldn't have done it this way. Sagte Mishneh, Hoylech Adam etzel Chamveni haragil etzlei. A person is allowed to go to a storekeeper that he's accustomed to go to him. And he tells him, Tenli beitzim ve'goizim b'minyan. Give me the following number of eggs or walnuts. Shekain derech balabayis liyismayim b'tech beisa. Because even in your house, when you take eggs or nuts, so you also count the amount that you're taking for yourself. So therefore, this is not something that's unique for sale to you, and you mention the number, and therefore it's allowed. In Abraisa we learned, the Abraisa elaborates more scenarios. A person can go to a shepherd, let's say there is a custom with him. He tells him, give me one goat, or one lamb, he can go to a butcher, let's say there is a custom by him. He tells him, give me one shoulder of the animal, or one thigh of the animal. Eitzel patam, he goes to the one that's fattened up the birds, and he tells him, Tenli toyrechad, give me one dove, or or one pigeon. Eitzel nachtam, you can go to the baker, he tells him, Tenli kikerechad, give me one loaf of bread, a gluskachas, or one roll. You can go to the storekeeper that is accustomed to buying from him. He tells him, Tenli esrim beitzim, give me 20 eggs, or 50 nuts, asara farsikin, 10 peaches, 5 pomegranates, and 1 esrig. So in all these cases, he can mention whatever number he wants, as the Mishnah said, as long as you don't mention the amount, the measure of what it is. Like Rashi says, there are kava kavayim, that's as we learned before, that's not allowed. Rab Shimon ben Elazar says, as long as you don't say the amount of the price of what you're buying, then it's allowed even if you're mentioning the number. Hadron aloch ein sadin. This is the conclusion of the third Perek of Masechta Be'eh.